Hi, and welcome along to episode 3 of the Dan Brown's Inferno Liveblog, in which we're going to look now at chapters 22 to 37, which is pages basically 100 to 150. At the end of the last episode where we left off, Langdon and Sienna had just snuck into the Boboli Gardens in Florence, and they were still trying to work out what this strange acronym Catraverser meant, while the army and a mysterious assassin are still on their tail trying to wipe out Langdon. So we pick up the action in the gardens, and Langdon finally works out what the acronym meant. He's realised now that all these trenches of hell are in the wrong order in the version of the Inferno they've been given, and when he puts them into the right order, it makes the phrase Circa Trevo, which obviously we all worked out. I love them for here, because sort of what we always do when it comes to Robert Langdon solving a puzzle is that usually once he's given you the clue, you've solved the puzzle a good 10, 11 pages before he gets around to it. But so we've now worked out what it meant, and he now tells us this is actually reference to a painting by Vasari, which is currently held in the town hall in Florence. Therefore, they have to now find some way of getting from the Boboli Gardens to the town hall. They wander through the gardens and they arrive at the palace, which is housed within the gardens, and they now realise that there is a swarm of Iron who are outside now moving in, trying to capture them because they've been spotted by a drone that has now told the army where they are, and they are now coming in to try and collect them. So they go and they hide in the gardens. They, as usual for Dan Brown, escape in some kind of fanciful way. They follow this strange tunnel across the whole of Florence, and they arrive safely in the town hall, and they get to the painting they're looking for. And that's basically as far as we get with the Langdon Sienna story from where we are here. And running parallel to this, we're starting to now understand more of the other stories. So you've got the silver-haired woman. We now find out that she is a member of the World Health people, and she has been called along to a secret meeting in which she is given a proposal that basically says that the human race is basically too populous, and the only solution to this is to basically start a radical cult of human beings, which obviously she finds utterly distasteful and says she can have nothing at all to do with it. But this obviously is where the central point of the story is going to, is that there is a plot there to basically wipe out a substantial chunk of humans on the earth because, quite simply, we are too vast, and we are going to end depleting every single resource in the world if we don't do something to try and curtail our population. Running alongside that as well, you've got your spike-haired assassin, who's now realised that she may not quite yet have failed in her mission because the army hasn't yet captured Langdon. So she now is hanging around on the Ponte Vecchio, waiting for Langdon to just walk past her. Obviously, he isn't going to do that. He's escaped via this strange overhead tunnel. And similarly, the head of the army, Bruder, is taking instructions from some unnamed superior, and again is trying to, for reasons unknown, hunt down and kill Langdon. So, you've got quite a few storylines that are currently converging all at once. Essentially, we know that for some reason what Langdon has, which is this strange picture of the Inferno, is what everybody wants, and for some reason they have to kill him to try and get this. And Langdon is now doing his usual thing of trying to decode a series of bizarre works of art and follow a trail to try and find wherever the hell he's going to. It's fine from where it goes, but I said in my last piece on this that this is a bit different to previous Dan Brown works in that we weren't getting quite so many of the blatant lies and the huge plot holes. Problem is, we're starting to get now into the actual meat of the story, and they have come back in a big, big way. First of all, as I mentioned last time, Dan Brown's device generally is that he knows where he wants to go. His plot is always centred around a variety of works of art and various artists. He has to get Langdon from one piece of art to the next. That's how he has to go. The problem is that he doesn't really seem to care how he does it. And the problem is that in doing this, he sort of... the storyline just has to go from A to B, and he doesn't really seem to care how it gets there. And the problem is that it creates a really, really jarring experience in that you're trying to read this book and thinking, well, that just wouldn't happen. I mean, quite often in this 50-odd page spell, you've got Langdon and Sienna just walking into museums. Now, the Italians, bless them, they have got an awful lot of culture, but they do know how to squeeze a tourist. There is no way in hell Langdon could be just wandering into museum after gallery after museum without having to queue and pay for things. You just can't do it. You can't get in that way. The point is that nowhere is free in Italy. You have to go in and pay for all these things. I mean, I admit it doesn't make exactly the best way to move forward a thriller if you've just got your hero queuing up to pay for a ticket. But the fact is, that's the plausibility of the whole thing. I mean, so you've got these kind of things in which he has to always find these very, very convenient passageways. For some reason, Dr. Sienna can now start beating up security guards to try and get them where they want to be. There's an awful lot, as usual, of very, very convenient plot devices. Particularly one in which, at the town hall, they have to get into the gallery of the 500, which is where this painting is held. They have to go and try and find. The problem is that the gallery is not open, and the floor is currently being buffed by a cleaner. Now, Langdon dashes up and asks desperately to use the toilet. The problem with this is that to get to that gallery, they've just had to sprint through a large atrium which contains a coffee shop. Now, if you were genuinely a cleaner, you would point them back and go, well, there's a coffee shop just there, they've got a lavatory. Why would you let him into the gallery? And then more to the point, the cleaner twice more sees them in the gallery, just looking at the paintings, and at no point goes, excuse me, the gallery is not open yet, and more than which, you haven't bloody paid. This is what frustrates me, is that all Dan Brown cares about is getting his plot from point A to point B. And he doesn't care how he does it, and it just makes a really, really frustrating way of reading things. But unfortunately, what becomes at this point even more frustrating is that the old Dan Brown lack of research has come back again with a vengeance in these pages. So first of all, you have things like there at the Palazzo in the Bowley Gardens, and as Dan Brown does, he tends to always try and give you some extra bits of information that are extraneous. So he says this was famously the amphitheatre where the first ever opera was held. That's just not true. That's where the second ever opera was held, not the first ever opera. The first one was held in what's now, I believe, a banquet building. It's these kind of silly little mistakes. There's somewhere else where he talks about a chap being killed on the Ponte Vecchio in 1216. It's not true. He died in 1215, not 1216. Where the hell is Dan Brown's editor in these things? We get various little pieces that go on there. At one point in the gallery of the 500, he tells quite a well-known story about how Machiavelli challenged Leonardo and Michelangelo to both create frescoes to paint on the walls, and told them, right, you can both paint opposite walls, you there, and you can both paint a fresco, and we'll compare them. Again, it's not quite that way done. The point is that actually the frescoes are done side by side, not opposite walls. You may think that these are really, really minor complaints, but the fact is that where in God's name at this point in time is Dan Brown's editor checking these things and going, actually, no, Dan, that's not quite right. There are things that you think are correct, but they're not. And I know one of the major things that's always said is, you have to bear in mind, this is fiction, and therefore it's not a true story. That's fair enough, but it may not be a true story, but there is no reason why to make these mistakes, because these are not intentional fictional devices, because saying somebody died in 1216 rather than 1215, what does that do to enhance the story? It adds nothing. The fact is that it's just Dan Brown making an elementary mistake. And the fact is that his editors are not, they're either not having the balls to correct him, they can't be bothered correcting him, or he thinks that little of his audience that we won't look at this and we actually go, actually, wait a moment, let's look at that. Oh no, what a surprise, he's yet again completely wrong. But I suppose, as you say, it doesn't really detract from the story. I mean, it's, as you can tell, it annoys me, but it seems to annoy nobody else. The problem was, and I was sort of thinking, what was I going to really have in this blog to get riled about other than these little bits and pieces that he's getting wrong? And suddenly, right around page 150, they're now in the Gallery of the 500, looking at this painting, trying to decipher what on earth it actually means. Because they know where they had to come, was here, but they've now got to work out where the next pointer and marker is going to. And Dr. Sienna, for reasons totally unknown, starts thinking about the nursery rhyme, Ring-a-Ring-a Roses, which she says she now understands was a nursery rhyme about the plague. She's supposed to be intelligent. Nobody in their right mind anymore believes that nursery rhyme is about the plague. It's not. Everyone knows it's not. The point is the whole thing makes no sense. It's not about the plague. Why would somebody who's intelligent enough to know all these randomly obscure quotes, all this stuff about art and culture, and yet doesn't realise that that nursery rhyme has nothing at all to do with the plague? More to the point, why is Dan Brown putting it in to say it's to do with the plague? Then, seconds later, you get another claim, it's even more bizarre, which is that Langdon realises that this gallery he's currently in once housed the Damien Hirst sculpture, For the Love of God, which he says caused uproar on its display. That is simply not true. What Dan Brown is doing, and what he quite often does, is he's getting two things confused. There was a Damien Hirst sculpture in that building that did cause uproar, but it was not For the Love of God. It was the follow-up piece, which was called For Heaven's Sake. Because, as with Mother and Child Divide that Damien Hirst did, the first thing he did was to cut a cow in half. Then he cut its calf in half. The point was, For the Love of God was an adult human skull that was studded with an awful lot of diamonds. I think over 6,000? There was an awful lot of diamonds in it. What he did as a follow-up piece, For Heaven's Sake, was he took a child's skull and did diamonds, and that caused the uproar. So, again, you might not think that that causes problems, but we are being expected here to believe that Robert Langdon is one of the best art critics in the world, and yet he doesn't realise the difference between two pieces of Damien Hirst artwork that are completely separate. One of them which was genuinely well received, and one which caused absolute uproar. Seriously, Dan Brown, do your research, because it's starting to really, really tick me off that these stupid little things that you may not think are very important, but the fact is that they jar from the story. And every time you see one, you think, no, that's wrong. It makes you suddenly get out of the story, out of the moment, and suddenly have to now come back and re-engage again to try and get back into the story. So we're going to carry on. We're going to see what happens in the next 50-odd pages. Hopefully nothing as glaringly wrong as that. And I shall chat back with you in a few days' time. See you soon. Ta.